One of the very useful tools in Adobe Photoshop are the adjustment layers. Adjustment layers allow you to make changes to your image without affecting the original layer. Now let's see how adjustment layers work. To apply an adjustment layer to my project, what I should do is to go here. And here, as you can see, beside the Properties tab, I have the Adjustments. So I click on the Adjustments and I will have access to all these options. Now, if you don't see the Adjustments tab here, what you can do is you can go to the Window menu and click on the Adjustments. In the Adjustments tab, you have access to a number of different options. So these are different adjustments that you can apply to your image. So let's go on and apply one of these adjustments. So I choose the first one, brightness and contrast. When I click on this, as you can see here in my layers panel, a new layer is added, and that layer is called brightness or contrast. And right here in the properties panel, now I have access to the properties of these new layer, which are brightness and contrast. So let's go on and change some of these properties and see how does that affect our image. So I reduce the brightness, and please pay attention to how that affects the image. And then I can increase, for example, the contrast. The good news about the adjustment layers is that they are non-destructive, and therefore they do not actually change the layers beneath them. So that means that I can easily deactivate them by just clicking on this eye icon over here. As soon as I do that, I actually go to the previous state of the image. So you can activate it or deactivate it by just clicking a button. You have probably noted that the brightness or contrast adjustment layer that I have added to my image does not actually apply only to one layer. It rather applies to all the layers beneath it. So right now, the brightness or contrast adjustment layer is above all of the layers except for these text layers. And you can of course see the result on the whole image. So now let's see what happens if I click and drag this adjustment layer down and just bring it on top of the background layer, which is just one color, this color. And as you can see now, the adjustment layer only applies to what is beneath it, which is just one layer. So bear in mind that the adjustment layers apply to the layers beneath it normally. But you may want to apply an adjustment layer only to one specific layer and not to the rest of the layers beneath it. Let's say, for example, I would like to apply this brightness or contrast adjustment layer only to this layer, the one layer beneath it, which is the layer of this girl, and not to any of the other parts of the image. So in that case, what I should do is to go to the adjustment layer, right click over it, and then click on this option, create clipping mask. And as soon as I do that, as you can see, a small arrow icon appears here that indicates that this adjustment layer is only applied to the layer below it and not the rest of the layers beneath it. And you can see the result on the image. So right now the brightness and contrast only affects this layer, the layer of the girl, and I can change that and you will see that the effect is only applied to one layer. You can also apply an adjustment layer only to part of a specific layer or part of the whole image. Now let's see how we can do that. So let me just go to this other Photoshop file where I have this landscape photo. And here I would like to increase the brightness and contrast of only the sky. So I would like to keep the brightness and contrast of this part of the image as it is and just change the brightness and contrast of the sky. So let's see how we can do that. I start by adding brightness and contrast adjustment layer to my image, and then I just increase the brightness, maybe a little bit of contrast. And then what I can do is that I can select the eraser tool and then make sure that I am on the adjustment layer, and then just start to erase. And as you can see, as I am doing this, I'm actually removing the effect of the adjustment layer on the part of the image that I am erasing. So right now I have increased the brightness and contrast of the sky while keeping the brightness and contrast of this part as it is. And you will see the effect when I change the brightness, for example. Aside from brightness or contrast adjustment layers, you also have other adjustment layers that you can choose and use in your projects. Let me show you another one, which is hue or saturation. So I click on hue and saturation, and as you can see, I now have different properties of this layer, and I can change those properties. So for example, if I change the hue, as you can see, the color of the image changes. So if I click on saturation and change the amount of saturation, as you can see, the saturation of the colors changes, and of course the lightness can change as well. So I just add this hue or saturation layer to the layer of this girl, and as you can see, using an adjustment layer like hue and saturation, you can do some very interesting things with your image and your project. So I leave it to you to go forward and try these other adjustment layers and see what you can do with all these different options with your project.